Welcome to another episode of To Preserve, Protect, and Defend the Soul of America. Today, we examine the sacred fire, American barbecue, and the politics of pit culture. The word barbecue is often used to describe a casual weekend cookout, but in its most historically grounded sense, it is a slow, meditative process of converting heat and smoke into texture, a technical discipline that relies on knowledge long predating the arrival of European ships. Archaeological evidence suggests indigenous peoples throughout the Americas developed sophisticated methods for slow cooking and smoking game thousands of years ago. The Taino people of the Caribbean cooked meat on a framework of green wood sticks elevated over a fire, a structure they called a barbacoa. Tracing the lineage of the pit is a way of examining how American identity was forged in the heat of its most troubling foundational conflicts, from indigenous displacement to the era of slavery. The defining cuts of American barbecue, pork shoulder, ribs, and beef brisket, were historically the least desirable portions of the animal. These dense, fatty, connective tissue-heavy cuts were the residual portions left for enslaved people after the more valued cuts had been allocated to the slaveholders' table. Enslaved cooks utilized West and Central African culinary traditions to bridge this gap. This fusion of techniques allowed them to convert those discarded scraps into a highly sophisticated cuisine, using complex spices and acidic, tangy preparations to balance the heavy animal fats. By the mid-17th century, the political barbecue had become a fixture of American public life. Candidates for office, including George Washington and Andrew Jackson, sponsored massive feasts to project a populist image to white voters, understanding that feeding a crowd was an effective form of persuasion. These events functioned as a staging ground for early American democracy, where white men of different classes could share food on equal terms. But the labor of preparation remained invisible, performed by enslaved pitmasters, whose mastery was valued in a practical sense, even while their personhood was legally denied. Managing a pit is a problem of thermodynamics. The low and slow method operates on a timescale that allows simultaneous processes, flavor development, moisture management, and fat rendering, to occur in a balance that high-heat cooking cannot replicate. This visualization shows the Maillard reaction. By holding meat between 225 and 275 degrees Fahrenheit, the slow accumulation of reaction products allows for secondary chemical reactions that would otherwise short-circuit under high-heat searing. The process also relies on collagen hydrolysis. Connective tissue protein makes tough cuts like brisket resisted to cutting, but when heated above 160 degrees for hours, that collagen melts into gelatin, a protein that lubricates the meat fibers and creates a tender, yielding texture. This chart tracks a phenomenon known as the stall. As moisture migrates to the meat's surface and evaporates, that evaporation absorbs heat energy, keeping the internal temperature constant for hours despite the ongoing heat from the fire. Pitmasters mastered these complex interactions long before modern sensors existed. They learned to read the color of the smoke and the weight of the meat, treating the fire as a form of somatic engineering. Between 1910 and 1970, 6 million Black Americans moved from the rural South to northern and western cities. They planted their traditional techniques in new soil, where these practices eventually calcified into the regional rivalries that define the modern barbecue landscape. In the Carolinas, the oldest tradition is whole hog cooking. In the eastern part of North Carolina, pitmasters season the meat with a simple vinegar and red pepper sauce, a stark preparation designed to cut through the heavy richness of the animal fat. Texas barbecue represents a crossroads of Mexican, German, Czech, and African American cultures. In Central Texas, the tradition descends from butcher shops that sold smoked beef brisket by the pound, emphasizing a simple salt and pepper rub and the smoke of post oak wood. Kansas City became a hub where the industrial cattle trade met the Great Migration. This resulted in an ecumenical style that cooks everything from pork to beef trimmings, the burnt ends, served with a thick, sweet, molasses-based sauce that has become the global standard for the category. Memphis distinguishes itself with a focus on ribs and a persistent internal argument over the wet versus dry method, where meat is either lacquered in sauce or seasoned with a complex spice rub before cooking. These regional disputes use food to argue for the legitimacy of a community's specific history and its place in the American story. In the late 20th century, barbecue was increasingly framed as a competitive sport. Organizations like the Kansas City Barbecue Society established standardized rules and judging protocols, creating a social world of traveling teams and custom-built trailers. This competitive environment created its own specialized flavor profile. Because judges often taste only a single bite, entries are optimized for immediate impact, using heavy injections of broth and butter to ensure hypersaturation, and sweet sauces that trigger an instant positive response. The 2010s saw the rise of the celebrity pitmaster, as major food media and awards elevated a handful of practitioners to global status. For Black politicians, this landscape is a minefield. Navigating a tradition built on Black labor, but publicly coded as white masculine identity, requires a careful balancing of cultural symbols. Environmental regulations are also beginning to limit traditional practices. In some regions, air quality rules have effectively prohibited open-fire wood-burning, pushing the industry toward automated pellet smokers and high-tech monitoring that traditionalists argue misses the point of mastery. American barbecue remains a reflection of the nation's history, recording our systemic inequalities alongside our time-transformed creative triumphs. The pit is still burning, but the future depends on who we choose to recognize as its masters. This episode is based on the 30-volume series To Preserve, Protect, and Defend the Soul of America by Sue B. Howell. The collection is available now on Amazon. Subscribe and hit the bell icon to join us for our next investigation into American history.